Peterbot and Pollo had the greatest year of all time in 2024, but they have now split and are playing on two separate trios. So who's doing better going into 2025? To answer this question, I watched all of their games from the most recent Division 1 finals to get a deep understanding of how both these teams play and how this will translate throughout the year. Before we get into the actual gameplay, let's take a quick look at each team's player breakdown. For Peterbot, he is playing with Ritual and Cold. Ritual is one of Fortnite's best fighting IGLs and does a great job of leading Peter to great positions where they can frag out together. Cold is one of the only players on the planet who can match Peter's firepower. With this combination, this trio can absolutely frag out throughout the entire game. Pollo is playing with Bolts and Rapid. Both players are incredibly smart and aggressive players. Rapid is their main tarper, but anyone on this trio is more than smart enough to lead an FNCS winning trio. With Rapid tarping this team to great positions, Pollo and Bolts are primed to dominate the mid and low ground throughout 2025. Let's move on to how both these teams play. Pollo's team lands at the Demon's Dojo while Peter lands at Brutal Boxcars. Both these teams take large splits and do creative things to capitalize on their loot. Peterbot lands on the train while Cold lands at the actual POI and Ritual loots the South Mountain split. As the train runs through Brutal, it slows way down, allowing him to farm up loads of materials before getting back on the train. He then takes the train into the tunnel where he collects many slurp barrels and gets the train loot, including the mythic AR. From here, he takes the extra heals he has and collects them by this porta potty. He then uses it to teleport himself up to the top of the mountain where he drops off a ton of heals before collecting the rest back in the tunnel. From here, he claims a spot on this hill looking for Storm Surge. Based on which sprite spawns, they get someone on the trio to try and take a water sprite to one of these 3 sprite shrines to receive a water boon. This gives them a huge advantage as it allows them to trade lots of Storm Surge as the game goes on. Once they are done looting, they will often look for Storm Surge and Magic Mosses or Pump Power, but this is actually where I'm concerned for them the most. This trio is so dominant and scary that a lot of times teams don't rotate into their sightlines trying to avoid them. As a result, this trio has struggled a little bit with their Storm Surge, but I don't think this will be a long-term issue for 2 reasons. One, this team has Ritual as their IGL, and he had the same issue at Reckless Railways last chapter, and he was able to figure it out by the end of the chapter. And they are working with Coach Razaru, who has also experienced dealing with the similar Surge issues in the last chapter as well. Moving to Pollo's trio, they land at Demon's Dojo. Rapid lands at the North Lake and oftentimes collects his shield sprite to get the water boon. Pollo lands in the POI and Bolts lands to the South split. As Bolts is gliding in, he targets our Demon's Dojo, but right before he reaches the spot where he would need to pull his glider for his south split, he pulls his glider high and scouts to see if either drop is contested. If his drop was contested, he would then go into Demon's Dojo and then loot south to make sure that they don't get picked off. The main thing I love about this drop spot is how many shield barrels there are. Each player can comfortably get up to 100 shield, leaving plenty of extra heals to bring into the mid game. The main advantage of this POI is the boss that drops a mythic Oni mask with 50 charges that Pollo carries and a mythic SMG that Rapid carries. By using this SMG, Rapid saves on AR ammo while still being able to get lots of surge. The main problem this drop has is its lack of metal. Bolts is able to consistently cap out his metal from his split, but if they don't get the zone, they are forced to rotate into pump powers to get their metal. This is working for them for now, but this is something that could definitely be exploited in the long term. Moving on to the mid game, both teams look to consistently find teams who are separated to jump on their solos for easy picks. Both teams are incredibly good at this, and I want to use this fight from Peterbot as a perfect example of how to isolate a solo correctly. They see that Victor V is separated from his trio, and so as a result, they place a ton of cones and floors between Victor and the rest of his trio. This means that when he tried to get back to his teammates, he was instantly in their piece control, giving them an easy pickup. How each team approaches these fights is fundamentally different though. Peter's team likes to establish wide splits off their mountain where they can then isolate players from across the map and jump on them for easy refreshes. In contrast, Pollo's team plays a much more of a roaming playstyle where they will use many of their Oni masks to jump around the map and try to find players to pick off. This difference in the mid games leads to a fundamental difference in how each team plays the partial zones. Because they have saved up on their Oni masks, Peter's trio will often Oni into the dead sides of the partial zones to refarm up their materials and set themselves for a dominant endgame. In contrast, Pollo's trio will often have no or very few Oni masks remaining heading into the partial zones, so they are forced to rotate into the congestion and look for a more aggressive refresh play. They usually could find these plays, especially with their mythic SMG, but this is something that could hurt them going into a grand finals lobbies where these refreshes might be harder to find. Outside of these fights, both teams look to trade lots of surge with the teams around them, as they didn't really care if they got hit, as they could simply sit in any water source and heal themselves back up to 175 HP with the water boons that both teams got in their early games. Moving on to the endgame, both these teams start to shine, but in very different ways. For Pollo's trios, their endgames look incredibly well polished. They have a very well defined mid-ground and low-ground playstyle that is incredibly cohesive, and all players seem to be working together in a very fluid playstyle. Rapid does an amazing job of keeping this trio in safe positions along the edge of the moving zones, and then has some of the best low-ground claims I have ever seen. They do a great job of using their Oni masks to claim the frontside low ground, and once they get there, Rapid does a great job of making tons of space that Bolts and Pollo can thrive off of. This team uses to convert 5 top 5s, as this position leads to great consistency but struggles to pull wins. Despite being a low ground team, they are more than capable of playing height when they need to. In Game 2, they are basically gifted the high ground on the first moving zone. They did a great job of creating a thin tarp along the dead side of the zone, making it really hard to get Oni masked on, and by tarping on the dead side edge of the zone, they could simply look down and apply tons of pressure until they could easily clean up the game. When comparing this playstyle to Peter's trio, I came to the conclusion that Peter's trio is more mechanically skilled but works worse than Pollo's. Peter and his team in this tournament were also mainly a low and mid ground team, but they seemed to be a lot less comfortable in these positions. A lot of the time when watching them play, it felt like they would position themselves poorly in the endgame and then use their individual skill to bail them out of these situations. To give them credit for their tarping, when it looks good, it is some of the best tarping I've ever seen, as Ritual will often create tons of space for Peter and Colt to frag out, but too often they find themselves overextending for kills or simply tarping in dangerous positions. Despite this, they still had incredible consistency, mainly due to their ability to fight their way out of bad spots and solo clutch games into places they shouldn't reach. So who do I think is the better trio? I think that although Pollo, Rapid, and Bolts feel like a more cohesive and well put together trio, the raw skill of Peter, Ritual, and Cold simply outmatches them. I think there's a world where Pollo, if he and his trio fix their small mistakes, could beat out Peter's current form, but if Peter's trio can clean up their mistakes, which wouldn't be that hard and will likely just come with practice, they could create a run in 2025 that challenges Peterbot and Pollo's dominance in 2024. So who do you think has a better trio? Let me know in the comments below and make sure to like and subscribe. Peace.